Ascension in mainstream spirituality is presented as a shift from a three-dimensional condition into a higher fifth-dimensional state. It is described as an energetic evolution rather than a physical departure. The framework assumes that experience exists across levels and that an essence can move from one level into another through raising vibration, healing, and intention. From a metaspherical lens, this structure rests on an assumption that is never examined. The idea of vibrational frequency suggests that everything exists on a scale that can be increased. This introduces comparison and direction. It implies that one condition is lower and another is higher, and that movement between them is possible. What is called ascension is then framed as progress toward a more refined state. The distinction between three-dimensional and fifth-dimensional experience follows the same structure. One is described through division, tension, and sequence. The other is described through unity and immediacy. This creates a contrast that reinforces movement from one condition into another. Metaspherically, there are no dimensions to move between. What is called a dimensional shift is the reduction of interpretive density. When interpretation is active, experience appears structured, divided, and sequential. When interpretation relaxes, that structure softens. This change is then described as entering a higher level, even though nothing has been entered. The concept of light body activation also follows this pattern. It assumes that the essential form is transforming into something more refined in order to hold higher frequency. This frames experience as something that must be upgraded. From a metaspherical perspective, no transformation is required. What changes is the intensity of interpretation applied to what appears. Ascension symptoms are commonly described as physical and emotional adjustments. Fatigue, shifts in perception, and changes in relational patterns are interpreted as evidence of transition. These are not signs of movement into another dimension. They are the result of reduced resistance. When interpretive control relaxes, sensation becomes more apparent. Without the usual filtering, intensity is no longer suppressed. The same applies to emotional fluctuation. What is described as purging is not the clearing of stored material over duration. It is the appearance of sensation without suppression. Interpretation then organizes this into a narrative of release and progression. The roles assigned to starseeds, guides, and ascended beings extend the same structure outward. They introduce hierarchy and purpose within a system that assumes movement toward completion. This reinforces identity within a larger narrative rather than clarifying the mechanism that produces the sense of identity itself. Practices such as shadow work, DNA activation, and grounding operate within the same framework. They aim to refine experience in order to reach a different state. Each reinforces the assumption that something must be changed or improved. Surrender allow. B does not operate within this orientation. Surrender is not the act of raising vibration. It is the cessation of interference with what appears. Nothing is directed toward improvement. Allow is not the cultivation of a higher state. It is what remains when resistance is no longer maintained. B is not the arrival into a fifth-dimensional condition. It is what is already present when no structure is imposed through interpretation. Ascension is not a transition into another level. It is the interpretation of reduced structure as movement. When interpretation relaxes, experience appears open and immediate. This is then described as a higher frequency or another dimension, but nothing has been entered and nothing has been left. Nothing has been entered and nothing has been left. What remains is conduction without reference. This is the language of the spheres.